MASC began to work on helping co-ops buy property.
What the push was at that time was to secure the purchase of the houses that were already cooperatives.
In 1971, MASC helped to start Nottingham Co-op on Langdon, and as well helped Hillel with starting Kibbutz Langdon, a Jewish co-op. It also gave loans to help start or just help Nature's Bakery, Brindlewood Crafts Co-op, Whole Earth Learning Community, Consumers Co-op Garage, and Sunflower Kitchen, a co-op restaurant.
I first lived in a co-op in 1971, and that was at 10 Langdon Street, and I think that's what it was called. It was 10 Langdon Street. I don't really remember.
I talked my dad into letting me move into a co-op. And he had been in a food co-op when he was at University of Michigan during the Depression, so he thought that was okay.
Melting Snow at that time was essentially a house of Nature's Bakery, and everybody who lived in the house, almost everybody, was part of Nature's Bakery Collective. I wasn't, but I lived in the house too.
I grew up in a large family, and I was 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and we were basically, we were our own little co-op in a way too. So the co-op was not a complete departure. It was sort of an extension of family values in the sense that you look out for each other.
On an individual basis, I think a lot of people who lived in the co-ops were politically very active, and there would be meetings and things like that, but not as an institution, shall we say. I think that MCC always did a very good job of staying focused just on housing.
Yeah, I mean, there were people there that would get into it to one degree or another. Some people were very ideological and some people weren't very much at all. Some people just liked the fact that they could go to the university, say, and come home and there'd be a nice vegetarian or whatever meal on the table, and there'd be some interesting people hanging out with ideas to talk to, maybe some party going on, something like that. And they were not very political at all. And then you had the whole segment that was more counterculture in the New Age sense, more looking into meditation and the spiritual journey and so on.
Almost everybody in that house was keeping a journal, and we would share our journals with each other. And we would, share books on spirituality or politics or whatever.
I'll never forget someone who was signed up to do the dishes one night didn't do them, and when confronted with failure to clean up the kitchen or wash the pots or something like that, his response was, "Well, what's the point? They'll just be dirty again tomorrow." So that person did not really belong in a cooperative.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there were people who would just, for no reason at all, go down to the kitchen and make 10 loaves of bread and just leave them for people.
What were your house meetings like?
Awful. I've repressed all memory of the content. And to this day, I think I have an aversion to meetings that goes back to house meetings. I really don't like meetings.
Nottingham, I think, from the beginning tried to run by consensus, which the idea being that the group had an obligation to try to listen to everybody and take their ideas into consideration before a decision was made. And if a minority opinion also felt completely committed to something, they could block consensus. The problem is with consensus that it takes a high degree of responsibility by the individual to make sure that their ideas are worth running contrary to, say, 29 other people. And you don't always have people with a sense of community responsibility versus their individual self-interest.
That's one thing I don't miss, is the meetings. I knitted a lot of sweaters during those meetings.
When I first moved into Stone Manor, men and women lived on separate floors. That was the rule. It was a university housing facility in some manner or other, and one of the rules was separate floors. But there were already people who were cohabiting, but only barely, and it was an issue as to making sure that it was not discovered, so they would keep separate rooms in a sense, but for all practical purposes, were living together. But and there was a men's floor and a women's floor, and there was still that kind of separation. When Nottingham started, that was pretty much already breaking down completely. That was only a couple of years later than Stone Manor, but it was sort of somewhat famous for pretty casual nudity, not necessarily group showers, but if you got a dual shower, 2 spigots in this large space from when it was a frat, it didn't matter which gender the other person was taking a shower. If that's when you should take a shower before you go off to work or school or whatever, you take a shower. And if it's an issue for somebody, they can say so, and you should respect that. But generally speaking, it was casual.
Although MASC had accomplished much in its 2-year span, it was often criticized for not being effective in uniting the co-op community. The business and housing co-ops that composed it found they had different focuses and goals. Many saw the need for a more effective MASC, and it was reorganized and renamed Madison Community Cooperative, or MCC. MCC focused more on housing co-ops and set up committees to handle more of the administration. Despite the changes, MCC continued to be criticized. An account of MCC from August 1972 stated, "There have been some notable failures over the past year. Declining participation in MCC by co-op members and charges of elitism, the loss of Marvin Gardens and 22 Langdon to developers through lack of sufficient future planning, no new sources of funds for development, and failure of people with real estate experience to transfer it." In response to MCC's lack of effectiveness in house buying, some individuals formed the Wisconsin Student Housing Development Corporation, which leased 240 Langdon to start 240 Co-op and 120 West Gorham for Solvig Co-op. The organization also helped members of Brookwood, the Institute for Mundane Studies, to buy their house at 622 North Henry, which later became Toad Lane and finally Rivendell.